Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Japan. Prime Minister Shinzō Abe has announced a mega billion-dollar spending plan as he tries to drag the economy back to its feet again. But why would this one work when so many others have failed? Because the last thing the Japanese people need is another lost decade. Also this week, Uber backs out of China. Expansion just hasn't worked there for the mobile taxi giant, and so it's done a deal with its greatest rival, Didi. We go behind the wheel of the so-called sharing economy to find out why it works, but also where it falls down. Plus, aviation's last frontier. There are still so few direct flights to Africa, with sky-high fares to boot. Just what can be done to open up air travel for the world's fastest growing population. From a country devastated by World War II to a post-war economic miracle, then a lost decade in the 1990s, Japan's economy has gone through more ups and downs than most. Now thrown to the mix the world's oldest population as well, and you have a unique set of economic problems that won't go away. Let's not forget, we're talking about the world's third largest economy here, but it's not grown for years. Successive governments have failed miserably to end deflation, that is where prices and wages won't go up, leaving it now to this man, Prime Minister Shinzō Abe, to try again. Since 2012, Prime Minister Abe has been waging a war on falling prices, using what became known as Abenomics and his so-called economic arrows. The first arrow fired was monetary easing. But interest rates in Japan are already in negative territory, so they can't really fall much further. So now another arrow, stimulus. Cabinet ministers recently approved a $275 billion stimulus package to try to help the Japanese economy. So this week we'll try to figure out if this attempt will be any different to the others. Will it succeed where others have failed? Or is Japan's long slump destined to continue? We start with this report from Gerald Tan.
26 stimulus packages in 26 years. This one is a $275 billion vision for Japan, the most ambitious on paper since the global financial crash.
The recent upper house election was focused on whether or not to continue Abenomics. Implementing bold economic policies was Abe's goal if his party won. That is why we decided on a 28 trillion yen figure for this economic policy package.
Still, only a quarter of that figure involves new spending, and it's also unclear how that will be financed. The Prime Minister says he wants to support small-scale companies and help low-income families, including schemes to tackle a notoriously low birth rate.
The keyword for the new economic package is very straightforward: investment for the future. Investment for the future, growing industries such as agriculture and tourism, and investing in child rearing and nursing care to create a future where everyone can become successful.
Since coming to power 4 years ago, Abe has sought to lift Japan's lagging economy. He launched a three-pronged shock therapy dubbed as Abenomics. It consists of fiscal stimulus, structural reforms, and monetary easing. But even negative interest rates designed to increase lending haven't produced the intended results. Household spending remains low, wages are stagnant, and some economists predict the new stimulus package, much like those before it, will only provide a sugar high that will quickly wear off.
The deeper structural reforms that haven't really taken place. There have been some movement on things like corporate governance reforms, on getting more women into the workforce, for example. But the fundamental structure of the Japanese economy means that its long-term growth potential is very limited, perhaps 0.3 or 4% a year.
Japan's debt is nearly 2.5 times the size of its economy. Its strong currency is putting pressure on exporters, and an aging population means the labor force is shrinking while public spending on healthcare is on the rise. All factors that are fueling questions about how this latest fiscal plan will improve the world's third largest economy.
So let's put that question and others to our guests this week. Joining us from London, independent global economist Jeremy Batson-Carr. And Jeremy, that overriding question when we look at Japan right now, or at least this latest stimulus package, is why should this one work when countless others haven't? What are your thoughts on that?
There's an even more basic question, which is why on earth have the stimulus in the first place? Because optically, the Japanese economy appears to be fine. In the first quarter of 2016, it grew at an annualized rate of 1.7%, and it's expected to maintain positive momentum in the second quarter of the year when the numbers are out next week. But of course, you actually have to look beneath the data to see what's really going on in Japan. And that is, of course, that inexorably and slowly over time, the economy is not growing. In actual fact, it's going into reverse, it's deteriorating. And the hope on the part of the authorities is that this latest stimulus package, which sounds extremely robust, 28 trillion yen, although that's $280 billion, it's still 5% of the economy's GDP. Fact is, though, will this turn the corner? In the medium to long term, the answer is no.
So, if Japan was to be looking over its shoulder at other global economies, who does it need to keep its eye on the most? You know, we are talking about an economy that's already slipped from second to third largest, but I guess I'm thinking about the likes of South Korea, which, you know, really threatens Japan's position in electronics and the like.
Yeah, that's completely right. There are a number of regional economies, to say nothing, of course, of China itself, in Asia that are eyeing up Japan's enviable track record over the longer term for industrial production, technological know-how, etc., and wondering whether they can assume the mantle that Japan is casting off. So yes, it is a major issue, and of course implicit within your question is that uncertainty in relation to the Japanese currency. The yen has proved comparatively stable. It strengthened, of course, in response to the financial markets' disappointment, both in relation to the fiscal stimulus package and the Bank of Japan's monetary policy, but it hasn't strengthened above $100 yen, which seems to me to be a key line in the sand. But I think ultimately the Japanese authorities would quite like to see the currency weaken a bit in order to ensure that what vestige of economic competitiveness is maintained for as long as possible.
Just finally, Jeremy, this might seem a slightly odd thing to say, but I almost feel sorry for Japan. You know, you think about where it's come from, the post-war situation, the rebuilding, the bringing itself up again, and now it just feels like this economy, which it's got so much and it has all this potential for growth, but it just can't do it. Is that just me being a bit soft on them?
I think that global economics is no place for bleeding hearts, quite frankly. The fact of the matter is that Japan was in the sweet spot in the 1970s and the 1980s. It then took its eye off the ball, became rather introverted, tended to focus more on itself rather than its global ambition. There may have been global reasons for that at the time. And yet, as a consequence of that wrong turning in global economics, great U junction or Y junction, the country has inexorably lost its status and lost its standing. And of course now, compounding everything is the continued fallout from the Fukushima nuclear disaster, which I think will lie with the country for a long, long time, as I mentioned previously, particularly in the context of declining fertility rates. Japan needs more people. It does not need more investment.
Jeremy Batson-Carr with his thoughts on Japan this week. Great talking to you, Jeremy. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, why high-tech startups in Greece, like the creators of this robot, say the government should give them a break, a tax break. Right now, though, Uber and the so-called sharing economy, that is, hopping in strangers' cars, using their houses, the things we were generally taught not to do. We'll explore the effects of that economy in a moment, but the taxi booking app Uber was the major talking point this past week, as it pulled a big U-turn and got out of the Chinese market, the place companies are usually looking to expand into. It's selling out to its Chinese rival, Didi Chuxing, ending a fierce rivalry for market share. Uber's global business will get a stake in Didi. Didi will buy Uber's brand, business and data in China. The timing's interesting, though, because last week China actually legalized the online taxi hailing industry, complete with new rules which forbid such platforms to operate below cost. Both Didi and Uber subsidize their journeys, and as a result, funding Uber in China was costing billions. Now, Didi provides 14 million rides a day, making it a significant part of this sharing economy, a term which describes online and mobile marketplaces which make use of shared resources. For example, you may have heard of TaskRabbit, a marketplace that matches freelance labour with people who need jobs done or errands run. Or Airbnb, the San Francisco startup which lets you rent out a room to travellers. It's grown to become the poster child for this sharing economy. But is that a potentially misleading term? Because consumers are paying a middleman to access someone else's goods or services. Yes, Airbnb hosts or TaskRabbits or Uber drivers, they all run their own businesses. But the middleman is the company that runs the technology. Let's get more on this now with Zenon Capron. He's Managing Director and founder of the Asian consulting group Capronasia, joining us from Shanghai. So let's widen out and talk about the sharing economy. Recent example, when I was in California, Ubered everywhere, stayed in Airbnb accommodation, and you know, when you're using it, especially for the first time, all you can think of is, well, this just makes sense. It has few limits.
Yeah, certainly. I think, we're seeing a new revolution in the way that housing, transportation, many of the things that we do on a daily basis are being changed by the sharing economy. I think what's kind of interesting as well is if you look at the business model, I mean, Groupon was a great example of a couple of years ago where there are coupons, but it's for things that people don't necessarily use every single day. But if we look at the companies that are successful these days, it's the Airbnbs, it's the Ubers. You need to get places and you need to stay places. And so I think those business models within the sharing economy are really the ones that are taking off.
And yet it is a threat. Hillary Clinton, for example, is no fan of the sharing economy. She said it didn't create the, quote, good jobs, which in her case, America needs. It creates a sub-economy, and I guess that threatens the establishment.
Certainly. I mean, if you look at the challenges that, just talking back about Uber again, I mean, if you look at the challenges that they faced in multiple countries around the world, not just here in China, but in France, and they're running up against local taxi unions, and that's challenging because those unions and those organizations are designed to protect local jobs in whichever economy that they're in. So obviously, when you see something like Airbnb come along or Uber, it threatens to disrupt that model.
Uber, Airbnb, TaskRabbit, all these things, they are in effect middlemen, aren't they? They facilitate the transactions. So to that end, what do you think about responsibility if and when things go wrong, and they will inevitably? Can this middleman company simply say, hey, I just put you guys in touch, not my responsibility? Should they have more responsibility?
Well, we've seen from from the examples that you mentioned, in most cases, the company still stands behind its product. So, if you're renting out your apartment on Airbnb and there's a problem with a tenant, typically Airbnb will back you up. And similarly with Uber, if you have a problem with the driver, the company is still there in the middle. I think we're still in early days here, though. There hasn't been a lot that's been proved out in the legal systems in various regions and countries around the world where these companies are operating, to see ultimately who has the responsibility for that, because there are good arguments on both sides.
I wonder if this is all just, a symptom of the times we live in, where things move so quickly. This whole new economy has come up in the last 5 years, and we have to almost make the new rules around it and just, feel it out as we go, while it all happens so quickly.
Certainly. I mean, if you look at the internet when that first came out, and around the .com bubble in the 2000s, I mean, the way we were doing business is changing, and I think the pace of change is even more rapid now as you see these new models that really threaten to disrupt not just day-to-day things like taxis, but certainly we're seeing here in China the advent of digital payments, and so companies like Ant Financial and Alipay, that are creating new ways of completing payments that's really disrupting the existing financial industries. So I think across the board in multiple different industries, multiple different sectors and countries around the world, we're seeing these challenges for the kind of the old economy and the old way of looking at doing business.
Zenon Capron, a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us. Now to the skies, particularly the skies over Africa. The aviation industry there struggles with big losses, ageing aircraft, delays and, of course, disgruntled passengers. Except perhaps in Ethiopia, where the national carrier is now 70 years in business and bucking the trend for airlines across Africa. Charles Stratford was given access to Ethiopia Airlines base in Addis Ababa. This is his report.
An Ethiopian Airlines jet touches down at Bole International Airport in the capital Addis Ababa. It's one of 78 aircraft in the growing fleet. While other African carriers are struggling, this 100% state-owned company recently recorded a $148 million net annual profit. The airline's training centre currently caters for around 1,500 students. This is one of the airline's 6 flight simulators, costing between $18 and $50 million each.
You really get a sense of just how complex, complicated and exciting it is to fly a 787. This is the only simulator like it on the African continent. These 2 trainee pilots took off from London Heathrow a couple of minutes ago, and as you can see, some pretty bumpy conditions over southeast England this morning.
So how is Ethiopian Airlines managing such a smooth and lucrative ride into African aviation history? Poor management, bad investment decisions and government interference is blamed for losses at many other African carriers. Kenya Airways, for example, lost $252 million last year. Analysts praised the lack of government interference and solid state support for boosting Ethiopian Airlines.
One of the reasons they've done so well is because the government leaves them strictly alone. They can get on with doing the business as best as they can do it.
Back at the training centre, cabin crew trainees from Togo are being put through their paces.
Press, press, press! Bend down!
Airlines from all over Africa send their staff here.
Bend down! Stay down!
Rival airlines also send aircraft and equipment for repairs too. The airline's maintenance and repair overhaul service centre is the largest in Africa. Last month the airline took delivery of its first Airbus A350, a first for Africa. But there's been turbulence too. 2 crashes in the past 20 years killed more than 200 passengers, and highly publicised hijackings marred its security record. The airline's reputation was also damaged by a fire aboard a Boeing 787 at London Heathrow 3 years ago. Despite setbacks, the chief executive says the airline is good for Ethiopia.
This is a different and unique environment where you are not able to outsource as much as you want. So we have to be self-sufficient as much as we can because the airline is a strategic asset for the country, both in terms of foreign currency, foreign exchange generation, tourism promotion or export promotion.
An airline that is more than 70 years old is leading the way in Africa.
So what we see there is a real success story, but unfortunately it doesn't make up for how disjointed the aviation sector is in Africa. Say you wanted to fly from Cape Town in South Africa to Lagos in Nigeria. If there was a direct flight, you could hop between these 2 business hubs in just 6 hours. But there isn't. In reality, you'd have to make a stopover, perhaps in Johannesburg or Addis Ababa, adding 3 hours to just your flight time. And if you really wanted to knock costs down, you could try a Gulf connection, Dubai or here in Doha. Much cheaper, but 3,000 miles out of your way isn't exactly convenient. Well, we're joined now via Skype from Cape Town by Raphael Kuchis, Vice President for Africa at IATA, the International Air Transport Association. Raphael, give me a quick list, if you would, of the most important countries which need attention. Infrastructure improvements, new airports, fleet investment. Where are these hot spots which need to be served?
The hotspots are largely in West Africa. And Nigeria is one of them, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire. But we also have in the Sahelian region, we have Chad, and Niger. Then Burkina Faso, and we have Dakar in Senegal. Even though Dakar, there is a new airport which is almost coming up to stage. But in all of these countries that I have mentioned, the existing airport infrastructure is either small and constrained or old and dilapidated, requiring investment to actually expand and modernize facilities.
I think for a final thought, we should look at some positives. We had our report on the show from Ethiopia Airlines, which appears to have been a great success. What do you think they've done right and which others could learn from?
Ethiopian Airlines is actually, if you want to call it, the African aviation miracle. The management of Ethiopian Airlines is completely independent of any government interference. Government provides the airline with the support by negotiating bilateral air services agreement to allow Ethiopian Airlines to fly to as many countries as possible. Ethiopian Airlines has been able to develop a management culture that is stable and that has always stayed the test of time. They have come up with long-term plans and are implementing their long-term strategies very successfully. So they actually taking advantage of the absence of effective connectivity on the continent to open up their network and professionally reduce their costs and establish partnerships that have helped them really go places.
Rafael Cucci from IATA, we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much also for your time too. Have a nice day.
Finally this week, Greek robots. Perhaps not the biggest export industry, but that's the key. It's an export. In a country still stricken by its own financial crises, young entrepreneurs are looking overseas to make their money. John Soropoulos has more now from Athens.
It's a small step for a robot, but a giant step for Greek industry. This prototype is learning to clear obstacles. At full size and loaded with machinery, it'll be as big as a 4-story building, mining the sea floor or laying underwater cable. The Greek company developing these legs for a UK client started out with a robot to inspect submerged oil pipelines. It is now at the cutting edge of underwater robotics.
Despite the fact that we are in Greece, we combine expertise that is difficult to locate even globally. So we did this first project. We did a fantastic job there, and they found us again for this second project.
Enora's idea is simple: to build on Greece's greatest asset, its human resources, working strictly for overseas clients, where the money is. Even so, there are problems.
Enora is the exception. High-tech startups that export the labor of the country's top talent and earn rewards here in Greece are few. Most companies live in the Greek economy, and that is still shrinking. So 28% of them have disappeared, along with 840,000 jobs during the Greek economic crisis.
Greece's most powerful business lobby says constant tax rises on workers are making life difficult for employers.
The more you raise taxes, the more you increase tax evasion. You discourage business people and investors, and most importantly, you make life harder for employees and executives, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who will pay for tax increases.
Greek workers now pay 40% of their wages to the taxman, and with the latest measures, that'll go up to more than half. Greek employers say they can't compete with foreign jobs markets, which lure Greek workers away. Eventually, experts say, even starry-eyed startups, such as this one, will have no choice but to leave.
What is clear now is that companies are at the limit of survival. After 6 years of recession, after all this instability and the change in the taxation regime, it's now imperative for them to move outside Greece, otherwise they will just go bankrupt.
For now, Enora is trying to create an export industry here, but it may soon outgrow Greece's ability to nurture it.
And that is our show for this week. More for you online though at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE. Do use our hashtag AJCTC when you do, or just drop us an email. CountingTheCost@aljazeera.net is the address. I'm off for the next couple of weeks, so Hazem Sika will be counting the cost with you during August. I'll see you back here again at the end of the month. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.